Right?
I'll see you later.
You got some more now?
Everyone pressing.
Yeah, Chris.
Happy day.
Oh, sick. Who you doing? I was gonna say, something wrong.
Good morning.
So he's doing audit now, and we're like, our paths are like crossing, and we might be the same place.
Two sides.
Good
Morning.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay. So just one announcement. I emailed to the class. So on Monday, next Monday, the 21st, we won't be meeting in class here. I will instead post a recorded lecture, which will be available at 11 o'clock Monday morning, because I'm giving out a homework that'll be due at 11 o'clock on Monday. The lecture will be just like other lectures, and I will also post a homework assignment that'll be due on the 23rd. So really not different than holding class, except I'll be recording it. Okay, so the homework assignments. So I think the homework assignments are getting a little more complicated. I've handed out, I don't know if you find it useful, but I handed out the solution, the printed out solution, which I'm going to go through, and then it's two-sided. On one side is the homework that'll be due on Monday, and the other side, I thought I would conserve paper, is the solution to today's assignment. So the first problem was to total up values in a sequence and allow the user to say what the starting value is and what the ending value is, and how many values to skip in between. And where we want to validate that the starting value, what did I say? Starting value is greater than 0. So prompt the user for a number, change it to an integer, put it in the variable start, and now validate that that number is greater than 0, and we can do that by using a while loop to test to see if it's not greater than 0 or if it's less than or equal to 0. So this is sort of our standard template for doing prompting for a value and validating it. And the only funny part is, the only thing you sort of have to think about is what the test is here. So you're testing to see if it is, if the validation rule is, if it's invalid, it doesn't conform to the validation rule. And if it isn't, you print out an error message and then you reprompt the person and you just go around again. And so you know that once you're ensured that once you get out of the while loop, the variable start is in fact greater than 0. This should not be, at this point, a difficult idea. Again, I've sort of made it into a template for how to validate things. I didn't ask you to validate the other two values, the ending value and skip. We'll assume that those are reasonable values. So we know start says I want to start at some number like 2, and end is where I want to end 10, and the skip is how many values we want to skip in between. And so the way I did it is I initialized a variable I to what the start value is. I initialized the variable total to 0, and now in order to go through each of the values 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, what I want to do is to use a while loop so I can repeat those steps over and over again. And so I test to make sure that my starting value, well, actually this is going to be my starting value and my incremented value, which I'm putting in I. So is I less than or equal to end? It is. So I take I, add it to total, and put it back in total. And now that I've done this summation, which is really the point of this whole thing, I now want to get to the next value to add up. So I was equal to the starting value to begin with. I'm going to add the skip value, put it back into I, and now do this over again to test to make sure that I is not beyond the ending value. And if it isn't, then I'm simply taking what I is, adding it to total, applying the skip value to I, and just continuing this until it's done. And then once it's done, I'm going to print out the result, the starting, the ending, the skip I, and the total. Any questions on this? Any better, different way to do it, Chris?
I did it a different way. Basically what I did was I started off by giving it like an empty list, and then when you did, what I did was I would have the user put in the start value and then the end value, and then it would basically create a list of all those values in between. Like I had a while loop that created a list going from start to end, and then I took the sum of that list, and then it would be from 0, the first one, and then to the end, and then it would skip the skip value.
Did you put in the list the skipped value and use the sum function on the list?
So my sum function is sum of the number list, or sum of my list, and then brackets 0, and then colon skip. So it would skip that specific.
Oh, so you had colon 2?
Yeah, essentially. So say like what was it?
I get it.
Yeah.
So in my problem, so you created this list, and ultimately the list looked like this. The list was just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10?
Essentially, so it goes like from 1 to 10 to 1 through 10, yeah.
Oh, this is, okay. So Chris created this list. He said this thing's going from 1 to 10, so he put in the values from 1 to 10 in a list. And then he used the sum function on the list, and he did colon 2.
Or skip was the skip variable.
Right, whatever skip was.
Yeah.
Let's say it was 2. Yeah, sure you're smiling, me too. Okay. So, okay, I'm not sure how to react to this, Chris.
It worked.
No, I'm smiling because it's pretty clever. Does everybody see what he did? So he made use of this is not 2 in his program, this is skip. This is the variable skip, whatever we're skipping by. So he just said, I'm going to solve this by creating a list from 1 to n, and then just using that third parameter in the slice method, in the slice functionality, and then just using sum, and I don't have to do all this stuff with variables and stuff like that. That's pretty clever. I think. No, okay, fine, I'm stopping there. A variation could have, I thought what you were going to do. Does everybody see that? It's sort of nice. Fine, just play along. Okay, so.
I use the list function too. I just started list.
Okay,
start,
great, okay.
But I didn't use the coding thing, so it was.
Yeah, so I'm cutting you off because this is what I thought you were going to say, Chris. So Nimra did is she created the list, but when she created the list, she did, if you're going from 2 to, I'm assuming this is what you did?
Well, I initialized it with start, so whatever input value it put.
But ultimately you created a list that looked like this.
Yes, when you append it later on.
So she kept appending, but she used the skip when she created the value to append to the list, and then she just did sum of list.
Yeah.
That's where I thought you were going. Okay, so in some sense you were even cleverer. This is pretty clever. You sort of cheated me out of getting what I wanted in terms of the program, so you must be happy about that. No, I'm patting you on the back on this. I'm doing it in not a particularly good way, but. Okay, so there's a variety of ways of attacking it. I sort of applaud, anybody else do it with a list? Get out. That is so unintuitive. Who didn't do it with a list? Thank you. Okay, so does everybody get, I will say, okay, this is an uphill struggle given I've botched this. In writing code, if you've written code long enough, this would be the way that you would think normally to write it. Because what I want to get involved with the list, I can just iterate in a loop here and have this variable continue to have a running total. And that's sort of more traditionally the way you do programming. Okay, so, but having said that, the list facility within Python is incredibly powerful and provides you with a variety of ways of doing things. So I might be too quick to judge on this. So, okay. Did you get me? Go on. Okay, so I'm breathless with anticipation to see how people did the next problem. Okay, so let me take this out first. So the next problem was to prompt for players' names, and then prompt for the number of points they scored, and prompt for the number of games they're projected to play in, and then you're going to print out the total number of points scored by the team. So you're going to enter in each of the players' names, you can enter in their average number of points and how many points they're projected to play in, and at the end of it, you're going to then print out the total. Okay, I guess everybody got that. And then the tricky parts of this are going to be that you're going to ensure that the name that got entered is not entered twice, and so you need to do validation that the name is not entered twice. I think that was the only validation that I had. Okay, so, and then the other thing is that you wanted to print out the name of the player who scored the highest, who was projected to score the highest number of points, that player's name, and then you want to print out how many points that player is projected to score. That was so there were a couple of tricky parts to this. So let me take the part of the problem not figuring out who the player was who scored the largest number of points and how many points that they scored. I think that part of it might have been more straightforward. So I'm going to create, let's forget about max points now. I'm going to create a variable called team points that's going to have the total number of projected team points. And since I'm going to need to have to figure out if a player name hasn't been entered in more than once, I'm going to have to store each of the names that was entered. And I think if I store the names that are entered, why don't I put it into a list? And then I can just look to make sure that a new name that's being entered is not existing in the list. So I'm going to create this empty list called names. And now my first part is I want to go and get a name and make sure that it's not, I want to start the loop to get a name and make sure it's not the end. And so let's enter a player. So I prompt the person to enter a name. I'm going to turn the name into a lowercase. And then I'm going to test to make sure that it's not end. So in this particular problem, we know that we're done entering in values if the name of the person that they enter is end. So the name is not equal to end. It means it's a real player, and so I'm going to try to get all the other information. Now that I have a name, I need to make sure that's not end. I need to make sure that it has not already been entered, and so I'm going to use the end operator. Okay, so I have a list. I have a variable called names that have all the names that has been entered so far. The variable name is a specific name that has just been entered. I want to see if that variable name, value in name, is in names. If it is, it meant that the player's name is already entered, and let's say this is invalid. And so if that's true, okay, if that's true, then I want to print an error message, and then just reprompt for the name, and then turn it into lowercase. All I'm doing in these two statements is what I did up here. Unfortunately, I have to repeat these statements prior to getting in the loop and then while I'm in the loop. So this, again, is a validation loop. In this particular case, I'm validating that the name has not already been entered. And I'm making use of storing the names in a list and using the in operator. This is a standard thing to do. I've handed out the solution, by the way, of course, so you don't have to, you can type it in if you want, but it's on the back of the homework. Oh, sorry. I thought I told you. I prefer you watch and sort of understand and type stuff in. I'll do that from now on. So now that I'm in the loop, I know I have a valid name. And now I want to prompt for the number of points that the player scored, sort of standard. I guess I should have used decimal because I had fractional points. The number of games the player is projected to play in, I'm putting that in the variable games. I don't know why I put this Y. And now I'm going to add the name to the names list. So I'm taking the names variable and appending to it the name that was entered. I'm going to calculate the projected number of points the player scored and put it into the variable player points. And now I'm going to add the player points to the team points because the job here is to calculate the projected number of points everybody in the team scored. Now that I've done that, okay, aside from the fact of identifying the player who has the most number of points, now I'm going to just reprompt for the name, change it to lowercase. Okay, note that I'm not going to this while statement. I'm going to go up to here now, because it could have been that the user has no more names to enter, in which case over here they would have entered end. If they didn't enter end, then again I'm going to validate that the name is correct and just cycle through here. So this program really is just this while statement within the while statement, getting a name and make sure that it's not already entered, getting the points, doing some calculations, adding the name to the names list, and just doing this And then finally, when I get out, now in the variable team points is the total number of team points, and I can print that out. And again, okay, guys, as you're doing these problems, and as you read these things, and if you get stuck on a part, I really want to emphasize this. If you get stuck on a part, so for example, I think the hardest part of this problem was figuring out who had the largest number of points and what were those points. I think that was the hardest. And if you can't figure it out, leave that part out. Do the other part, create this framework. It turns out if you did that, okay, now I've got this working. I know that I left one part out, fine. Now let's go attack that subproblem. I can't emphasize enough that if you get stuck, don't throw up your hands. It's too hard. I can't do it. Goodbye. I hate them. Take a subproblem that makes sense, do that, and then after you get that running, I assure you that it's going to be easier to solve that other problem. Okay? Any questions on this part of the problem? Okay, so my solution, which will apparently be derided probably by Chris, I'm not sure in this particular case. He's probably going to get a better way of doing it. But we should get his solution first. Yeah, why don't, okay, fine. Why don't we turn the tables? He's a good guy. Okay.
For the part where you have to get the player and their total points, what I did was I created two lists. So it's the same convention where you're creating a list of names. I also created a list of whatever you enter a name and their amount of points, it creates a simultaneous list of the points.
Hold it. So let's assume I'm riffing on this. So Chris created a variable called points. He initializes to nothing. And after he calculates the total points, he then simply says points.append player points, right? So everybody get it? He's creating two lists. I only created one names. I created the names because I wanted to validate the name. You needed to do that. But Chris said I'm going to create a second list, which is going to sort of run in parallel with names, and it's going to store for every name the number of points that player scores. And so after I calculated the player points, I simply do another append to points.
And then to get everything, because they're running in parallel, what I did was I just indexed the points and just said, wherever the maximum points are within that list, give me the name as well.
You did this after you got out of the loop, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now, Chris, first you found the maximum points, right?
Mm-hmm. That's all in my print statement.
I'm going to do it in separate statements, but this is a good way to do it. Hopefully other people got this. So Chris's idea was, let's have names and let's have that as a list. And he created this other variable called points. So Chris scored 100 points, Dave scored 250, and Mary scored 400. So Chris now said the reason why he wanted to do this is he knows how to find the index. So there are three values here, index 0 to 2. He knows how to find the largest value in that list, right? Because we know that there's a max function. If it does max on points, it's going to return, this is going to return 400. Get it? So he used a bunch of, he's maximizing the utility of the functions and the methods that are in Python. So now he knows that 400 is the maximum number of points. Now, he doesn't know which of these values is 400. He just knows that 400 is the largest. But he also knows that there is the index function, right? And the index method, I'm sorry. And the index method okay, on 400. So if he uses the index method on points, the index method tells him the position of the value 400, the index of the value 400 in points. The index function, the index method looks for a value in a list and returns the index where it finds it. So in this particular case, this would return 2, because this is index 0, index 1, index 2. Okay, and then to seal the deal, then Chris says, now I know the index of the largest number of points. I can then simply use that to give me the name of that person. So he probably created a variable. He probably didn't do it. So did everybody get it? So he used max to get the points. He used index to get the index. And now that he has the index, now he can just go into names and pull that name out. How many people did it that way? Okay. That is a very good way to do it, and it makes use. It's not the only way. I didn't do it that way. Okay, there's no accounting for taste. But you should understand, I think those guys who got it, everybody who did it this way should get credit. I guess the situation is that Chris and everybody used this method were comfortable and familiar enough with the methods and functions within Python to try to craft a solution using those. It does require you to sort of have in the back of your mind this sort of toolkit of things that you can apply and then sort of pick out of that what you might use to solve that problem. And I will say, Python has a gazillion of these things. So it is not, in real life, it is not a bad way of doing it. In real life, if you're being hired to do this, and you think you need to do something to a list, some function, my suspicion is if you went into Google and say Python function to do this, that you probably would find one, or someone would give you some code that does it. Sort of one of the reasons why Python has become so popular, because of all the different functionality that's there that's sort of built in for you. So, but it does require you to be somewhat familiar with possibilities of what could be done. Okay. Nick? Alternative solution? Okay, before I move on, if you use an alternative solution and it worked, that's fine. What I do want everybody to hear is have an appreciation for this solution. Do you want anybody want me to go through it again? I mean, I'm just writing this out. The actual code for this would have been, after he gets outside. So all he's doing here is he's adding to the points. I'm going to do this my way. He didn't do it this way, but that's fine. So max points is going to be equal to the max of the points list, and then so we're going to use the index method to find the max point that I just found above, the largest number of points, and then he would have printed out here, so the max player is going to be names, that other list, and in this case it's going to be we're simply just getting max player, which was the index. Fine. And you would have printed out max point. And that would have been the solution in terms of Python code. The other thing, I was just sort of doing it in sort of the steps. Okay, Nick. Your dice.
So I had a similar appended the inputted score and the name in that order. So it would be like a pending, a bracketed player, comma, like not player score, comma, like name.
So your list was a list of lists?
It was, so I just named it list, but, or I'm sorry, I named it top player. So this was to find, I guess.
So what would be in it at the end of
I
it?
appended, so after figuring out the points and the name,
Yeah.
it would be
Would it be sort of like Dave 100 and then Mary, well, I should use what he had here before. It would have been Chris 100 and then Dave 250? Is that
yes,
what?
but it would be bracketed. I'm not sure it's right.
I got it. So you had a list of lists here. So you, in fact, had this as the first element. The first element was actually a list,
Yes,
and the second element was a list.
but it was the points first.
It didn't really, that wouldn't make any difference, right?
Well, I had to reverse order it, so I had to sort reverse, and then it would bring the highest number to the back.
So you did this.
Right.
Okay, so Nick created a list of lists. Okay, we learned that you can do that. Okay, and then, so that's what he did. So when he's going through the loop, he's creating this list here that has these values. And then what did you do afterwards?
And then I did the list dot sort reverse equals true.
So he, in place, can't remember. So then he reversed. No, this didn't work. Oh, that's crap. Okay, so
Because it brought the highest number to the end. And then,
so you're saying at the end of doing this,
well, then I had to make another variable.
hold it a second, you're saying after you did this, list looked like it took this and put it in the beginning?
Yes, or put that at the end, or yes, at the beginning.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm not really happy. You're satisfied? So I'm really surprised. I'm not sure why it did this. So I wouldn't have thought that this was the behavior. When he applied the sort method to this, it looked at just the first value of the sublist and sorted based on that.
Right.
I'm not sure why it does that, but I guess it did. So the sort method actually went and took the first element of the list, which was a number, and sorted it to give us this. And now it's duck simple because now he's got a sorted list, and then the first element here has in it, the first element of the first list has in it the number of points that were scored, and the second element of the first list has the name of the person. It's the end of story. And I would have bet you a fair amount of dough that this wouldn't have worked. Because I'm not sure why it would have. I'm happy you did it. You must have experimented with this because you changed the order of it to get it to work. Sort of a clever idea. I'm not sure why it worked. Okay. You got a pat on the back. You don't get my money, though, because I didn't bet. So, anybody else? This is fun. So my sort of fuddy-duddy solution, which is now lost. Let me kill that. We're just bring it up again. Just be easier. And this is sort of a traditional way of doing this sort of thing. is the following idea. So this is the solution, but it also is a solution where it finds the name. So what I want to do is, as I go through and iterate through the list, what I want to do is each time through, I want to see if the value, if the number of points scored is the largest number entered so far to date. And so I set a variable called max points and set it equal to 0. And here's the code that's important. So what I'm doing here is after I append the name and compute the points and compute the total points, what I'm doing is I'm taking this player points, that's the number of points the player is projected to score, and I'm checking to see if it's greater than max points. The first time through, max points is set equal to 0. So the first time through, the first player, that number of points, assuming they just can get 0 points, is going to be greater than max points. And so what I'm doing is, if this is true, if that player had more points than whatever we found before as being the maximum number of points, I'm then setting this variable called max points, which is the same thing as this, to whatever those player points were. And then I'm setting max player to the name of that person. And the reason why I'm doing this is as I go through this loop, notice this is in the while loop, that I'm testing each time to see if that player's points is greater than the largest number of points previously entered. And if it is, then at that point it's the player, then I'm setting max points to that number of points, and then I'm setting the player to that person's name. So what I'm doing is I'm simply going through one at a time, right? So the person, we're entering in values. So we have player, and we have points, right? And so we have Chris, and he has 100. So at this point, I say, oh, Chris has scored the most number of points, so I'm going to save in max points 100. I'm going to save in max player Chris. Well, the next person through is Dave, and he scored 250 points. So I'm going to compare Dave's points, 250, to the max points, which at this point was 100, and say, wait, Dave scored more, so now I'm going to put in the variable max name Dave and put in the variable max points for 250. So what I'm doing is as I go through each iteration, I'm checking to see. Now let's suppose Mary, this isn't the data that I had, she only scored 200 points. Well, 200 isn't greater than 250, which was the largest number of points I scored. So I'm not going to change max points to 250, nor am I going to change max name to Mary. And then I fall out of the loop, and max name is equal to Dave, and max points is equal to 250. So I'm using sort of just going through the loop one at a time, and then keeping track of who had the maximum number of points. Another way to do it. Anybody do it that way? Okay, so again, no accounting for taste. So that's fun. All the ways you guys tried are great. I'm applauding the variations. Again, you want to see different ways of attacking it so that when you have problems to do on your own, you have sort of ways to attack the problem because you've seen different solutions. Okay, new idea today. I'm closing the discussion on this. Get control of my desktop. Okay, so we're going to learn a new way of creating loops. By loops, I mean a while loop is a way of having statements repeated a number of times, right? We saw the while loop was good for validation. The while loop was just good for prompting people and getting values. Okay, so everybody to start off with. What I'm going to now tell you is another way of being able to create loops in sequence and repeating things. It's just another way. Okay? If I didn't show you this other way, you still could do every problem in the world using a while loop. It would be more difficult, but you could. So this other way of creating a loop is I think in some cases better than a while loop. But in some sense, there are competing ways of doing it. This other way that I'm going to show you is also standard in every programming language ever created. Okay, so suppose what I wanted to do is I wanted to generate the numbers between 0 and 4. I wanted to now print out the values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Of course, I could write a while loop to do that. But the new way of doing this is a for loop. Okay, so the new idea I'm teaching you is the word for, and the for has in it, okay, a couple of things that you have to set. So again, what I'm doing is showing you how to do a loop. This new way of doing a loop is called a for loop, F-O-R, as opposed to a while loop. And the for loop is structured in the following way. So everybody watch this first, and then we can type it in and run it. So the for loop has the word for. After the word for is a variable. It could be any variable name. Here I just created the variable name num. After the variable, you have the word in. And for now, we have the word range and then two values, a starting value and an ending value. And then a colon. What this for loop is going to do is it's going to, through each iteration, set the variable num to a value and increment it. So for this particular code, what is going to happen is the variable num is going to be created and initialized to the starting value, which is the first value in parentheses. So when you first hit this for statement, num is set equal to 0. After it does that, what it's going to do is it's going to execute all the statements below the word for that are indented. Again, indenting counts. So here, num is set equal to 0. Okay, the for loop is done. Not done. The for loop is done its first step. It then starts executing the statements below the word for. All the statements are indented. In this case, there's only one. In this case, it's going to print out the value of num, which is equal to 0. After that statement or statements is executed, we come back up to the for loop, just the way we came back up to the while loop. The same mechanics. And now what is going to happen is, in its trivial case, the variable num will be incremented by 1. And so now, in the second iteration, num is set equal to num plus 1, so num is equal to 1. And a test is done to make sure that the value of num is less than the ending value. So num would be equal to 1. Is 1 less than 5? Yes. Notice I said less than, not less than or equal to. Num is equal to 1. I print out num. Okay, so that's the action associated with for. I now come back up here. Num is incremented by 1. It was 1. Now it's going to be equal to 2. Is 2 less than 5? It is. So therefore, we're going to do the statements associated with it, which is just printing. It's going to keep on looping through this. Ultimately, num is going to be equal to 4. 4 is less than 5. We're going to print out num. We're going to come back up here. Num is now num plus 1, 5. Is 5 less than 5? No. And therefore, it exits the for loop. So the for loop will go through, if you recall, now let me do this the following here. Now, let's compare that behavior using the for loop as opposed to if I wanted to do this using a while loop. If I wanted to get that same behavior using a while loop, look at the code on the right. I have to initialize num equal to 0. I have a while num less than 5. I print out num, print num, and note now that num is equal to num plus 1. The for loop and that code are identical in terms of the behavior. They produce the same behavior. They print out the values 0 through 4. It turns out that the for loop on the left is less number of statements. Okay, that's great, but that's not should be the only reason you're going to use it. And there'll be a variety of reasons why you're going to want to use the for loop as opposed to the while. One case where you're going to want to use the for loop is if you want to generate a sequence of numbers from a starting value to an ending value. And I'm going to show you that we have flexibility in what goes in between the parentheses between 0 and 5. But if the problem calls for generating values in a range, integer values, you're going to use the for loop because the for loop does that for you very, very trivially. Again, you could have written it with a while loop, but the for loop does it for you. Great. So first thing is, okay, here's the mechanics. When are you going to use it? Number one, I want to generate a sequence of numbers. And again, I could have had multiple statements after the word print. I could have had as many statements as I want there. And again, so I've highlighted here that note that the values in the for loop are similar to the values in a while loop, but it's much more compact. Okay, so I'm showing the variations here, why the for loop is very powerful. So before I showed the numbers starting at 0 and going to an ending value. Was there a rule that says you have to have the starting value at 0? The answer is no. The starting value and the ending value are whatever you want. So it could have been a negative number to start off with. It could have gone from a negative number to a negative number. But all you need to do is give a range, and you need to give a range where the beginning value is less than the ending value. And then what it's going to do is it's going to step through incrementing, setting the variable num. In this case, it would initialize the variable num to -2, print out -2, increment num. Now num goes from -2 to -1. And adding 1 to it is -1 less than 4, yes. And we continue to go through. So there's no restriction that the beginning value or the ending value are positive numbers. They can be positive or negative numbers. They have to be integers.
Before running the for loop, do you have to set
No.
equal to anything? Nothing?
Right. Good question. No. The for loop initializes it. So the for loop, notice here I had to initialize num to -2. The for loop, when you fall into it, says the first thing that it does is it takes this value and sets it and makes num equal to the lower value.
So could we use other functions as well, or just range, or?
In here instead of this? So could this have been some expression? The answer is yes. The answer is, let me get back to where I was. That value here, this doesn't have to be a constant. It could have been another variable. So I could have had if I wanted to, that's fine. So I could have had a variable. I could have actually even had something like, I could have had an expression here. So start is 15. So I come in here. So start is 15. Num's going to be equal to 15. And this is going to loop around 10 times because I'm setting the ending value to start plus 10. Okay? But if I wanted to, right, so note here that num is not initialized before the for loop. The for loop does that for me. Okay? Chris?
Does the range convention work the same as if you had a list of numbers? So could you tell it to, create a range from 0 to 10 and then skip 2 or whatever?
Spoiler alert. I'll get to that.
Okay.
That's a good question. The answer is you can use the list. Let me just go through it. You only have to wait maybe 10 minutes. I'm on a roll here. Everybody get it so far? The name of that variable is anything you want. I had num there before. It could be yada. It doesn't really make any difference what that variable name is. It doesn't care. Traditionally, the variable name is something like I or J or K. It's just sort of old conventions from programming, but it doesn't make any difference what you want. The variable name should be something meaningful. And so far, so what we've seen is that range from M to N, so it's going to go from M up to include, but not including N, so it's going to go to N minus 1. M and N must be integers. They cannot have fractions in them. At this point, we see that that m has to be greater than n. I'm going to take that away in a minute. Okay. Next matter. Is everybody okay with that? The mechanics of this is really straightforward. Again, all we're doing is we're generating sequences of numbers. The next variation is, in the for loop, is in that range component. Okay, we have a start value and ending value. You can actually vary the increment. So by default, if you don't have a third parameter in the range statement, it's going to default to 1. If you do, okay, you can put whatever number you want. It has to be an integer. And if, for example, if I had 0, 25, and 5 in this particular loop, what it would do is it would initialize num to 0, okay. And now when it came through and did the increment, instead of incrementing num by 1, it would increment it by this value 5. So then the next iteration, num's equal to 5. And then the next iteration, num's equal to 15, because I'm adding 5 to it, and 10, and then 15, and 20. And then on that, finally, when it put it equal to 25, it would exit the loop because 25 is not less than 25. Sort of a normal, you guys have seen hopefully enough of this stuff. It's something you probably would have predicted that it would have made sense to provide the flexibility to control the increment, and you can by just specifying that third parameter. Why don't you guys take 5 minutes, it should take you less, to try to do a problem we did before and see how much easier it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to create, we can do conversions from gallons to liters. We did this before, and now you get to see it's easier to do this. So what I want to do is to generate a pair of values, the numbers 1 through 10 representing gallons, and to the right of that, tell me how many liters they are, rounding to 2 decimal places, where 1 gallon is equal to 3.785 liters. So why don't you guys try writing code that provides this output? You don't have to input, you don't have to ask the person to input, just go from 1 to 10. Yeah. Okay. So, so the cool part here is I want to generate the numbers from 1 to 10. I don't have to worry about having a variable and adding one to it in a while loop. All I need to do is create a for statement that's going to go from in the range from 1 to 10, and now all I need to do, as this shows, is forgetting about this. I'm just putting a heading here for gallons and liters. But note here, everybody, I'm creating a variable called gallon. Let me kill this. It takes away. I'm creating a variable called gallon, and I want that the variable to assume the values from 0 to 10, and so my range is going to go from 1 to 11. So one funny here is it's got to be one more than where you want to go. And now gallon is going to, each iteration it's got to have the value of 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then I can simply print out gallon, and then I'm putting out in the print statement, I could have created another variable to do the conversion for the liters, but here I'm simply putting in the print statement multiplying gallons times 3.785, rounding it 2 decimal places and printing it out. So note the convenience here of the for statement generating those numbers from 0 to 10. And what if I said now, everybody get that? And what if I said now I don't want to go from 1 to 10, I want to go from 2 to 10, I want it to be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. How would I change my for statement to do that, to support that? So instead of going from 1 to 10, is what I had here before, strike that. Here I have 1 to 10, right? Now what I want to do is I want to go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Sure, yeah?
It started at 2. It could be in range 2, 11.
Right, it would simply start at 2, go to 11, and then I would add, so my 2, I can control where I start by the first parameter. I'm not controlling where I'm ending, but I can control how much I skip by the third parameter. So incredibly flexible for creating ranges of numbers, having a variable assume a range of numbers. I'll post the slides, guys, so you can always go back and look at it. Okay, so I can start wherever I want, I can end wherever I want, and I can change the increment however I want. What if I want now, instead of going up, incrementing, suppose I wanted to have variables go, but I wanted them to decrement. I wanted to start at 5, go to 4, go to 3, go to 2 to 1. So again, I want to generate a sequence of numbers, but I want the ordering to be in descending order instead of ascending order. And so in this particular case, check this out. Again, I can use the for statement. And now my first value is greater than my second value, but this Python is okay with because I'm telling Python that my increment is -1. So instead of doing a positive increment, I have as my third parameter a -1, and so now I'm going to initialize num to 5. Normally it'd say 5 is greater than 0, so I'm not going through the loop, but because it saw that the third parameter is a negative, it says, oh, he wants to go decreasing. So that's 5. So now instead of testing to see if the first value is less than the second value, it's going to check to see if the first value is greater than the second value. And that's controlled by the sign of the third parameter. So since the third parameter is a minus number, I'm going to go from 5. I'm going to initialize 5, num to 5. The next iteration, I'm going to take 5 and decrement it by 1. So it's going to be 4, and then 3, and then 2, and then 1. And then finally it's going to be 0. And then is 0... greater than 0, it's not, and therefore it's going to exit the loop. So not only can I control going up, the sequences going up, I can also control having descending sequences. So what will this print out? Surya?
Would it go from 25 to 0, decreasing by increments of 5?
It would be, so what would be the values?
25, 20, 15, 5, 0. Oh, not 0.
Not 0. Right? So it's never going to reach this value here. It's going to stop before. So that's correct. That would be the output. And again, I could have done this in a while loop, but it's just, it's more convenient doing it this way. Okay, is everybody cool with for loops generating sequences of numbers? But it has two other uses which are really quite valuable. Second use, we're getting close to what Chris wants, sort of building up. Got a sense for the dramatic. So suppose now you have a string. And what you want to do is you want to sequence and pluck off each character of the string to do something. The for statement supports that. So now, instead of having for, I still have a variable and in, but now instead of having a range statement, if I in fact have a string instead of the range statement, the way this is interpreted is that the variable ch will be initialized to h in the first iteration, and the second iteration will get the next character e, and the third iteration an l, and the fourth correlation in the fourth iteration another l, and the fifth iteration an o, and then it would exit. So if in fact you have a string and you want to do something, you want to pluck off each character of the string in succession and then do something with that character, you can use the for statement for that. So it not only has applications for numbers, generating sequences of numbers, it has applications for generating characters, or the character where it's going to pluck off a value. And I don't think you can control, I don't know of a way, I should have known this, of it, suppose you say, well, I want every other character. I don't think there's a way of doing that in the for statement. Yep.
So what is it testing for?
In this particular case, just the end of the string. Right, so analogously, where you were testing a number to see if when we had the range, you were testing to see if it was, it goes 0 to 5, is it less than 5? Here it's going to go through every element of the string, plucking off one character at a time. And so here it's going to go through 5 times, because there are 5 characters in the string. Okay. We good with that? So we got numbers, we got strings. Okay, Chris, ready? So the third data type that would work on are lists. So now, suppose I have a list of values, and I want to go through and do something to each element of the list. So here, as the value, so here for item equal, and then I have a list. Here I have a constant, but it could have been a variable. Here, through each iteration, the variable item will resolve to one element of the list, where the first time it's initialized to the first element of the list, pear, the next time it would be apple, the next time it would be banana, then it would be grapefruit, pineapple, lemon. So this is very similar to what we did just before with character strings. But if I have a list and I want to pluck one off each at a time, I can use the for statement for that. And so here, the output for this code would be each item printed out. Okay, so once you guys try some of this, once you do the following exercise, write a program that will prompt the user for a string, and what you're going to do is you're going to output the number of vowels that occur within the string. So if the person entered in the hello space there, you would print out 4 because there are 4 vowels, 1, 2, 3, 4, in the string, where a vowel I'll define as A-E-I-O-U. And if you need me to go back to any of the slides, just tell me. Okay, see if we can tack this. So we're going to get a string like hello there. And what I need to do is I need to extract each character out of that string to see if it's an A, E, I, or U. So now we know that we have a tool that allows us to easily extract individual characters and assign it to a variable using the for. So I can say for, and now I'm going to create a variable, let's say it's ch, in, and I've already prompted the variable and I'm putting that into str. So now I can use my for statement to extract out of the variable string each individual character, and I'm going to assign it into the variable ch. So ch is now going to assume the value h and e and l and l and o without a lot of work on my part. Now after that for statement, now ch has a character, and now I want to test to see if it's equal to a vowel. How could I do that? Somebody. How am I going to see if it's a vowel? Oh, Dan?
Make a list of vowels.
Okay, so Dan says let's make a list of vowels. And he's going to put in the list A, E, I, O, and U. Probably want to, in addition to the string, after I prompt for the string, very good. Probably want to make it lowercase, and I'm testing for lowercase vowels. Okay, Dan. And now,
you test to see if it's equal, or if it's in the
so I'm going to make use of now test and see if in is equal to is in vowels. So I'm going to use an if statement to test to see if ch is in the list of vowels.
and then you can have like a counter.
So if it is, and I want to increase the counter, and I have a count, so if I'm going to use that, I'm probably going to have to now initialize count to be equal to 0. And now I can just print out count. So, everybody get this? So note here, the beauty of the for statement is that here, I didn't have to do anything with doing, I mean, it wasn't that big a deal to do string bracket 0, string bracket 1, bracket 2. The for statement extracts that out and it sets the variable equal to it. So now a lot of that work I had to do before is now taken care of it for me by the for statement, and each iteration will just get the next, will lop off the next character. This is great. And I didn't, okay, and Dan's solution is great, okay, but if I didn't want to create the list, I could have used also, I could have just, instead of checking to see if CH was in the list, I could have checked to see if it's in the string. They were both equivalent. So I could have created the list like Dan suggested of vowels and checked to see if it's in the list. Alternatively, the in operator also checked to see if a character exists within a string. And so I could have, instead of having the vowels there, I could have just had the list A, E, I, O, U, and that would have worked the same. Okay. So to wrap up, okay, the for is another way of creating a loop. in addition to using while. It provides a number of very convenient features to it in the situation where, A, you're trying to generate a sequence of numbers, integers. We've seen, if you have to generate a sequence of integers, you're going to use the for and figure out how within the 3 parameters you're going to manipulate that. So you have a variable that's assuming the values in the sequence. So it's number 1, a sequence of numbers. Number 2, as we did for this problem here, if you want to extract individual characters out of a string and do something with those characters, you can again use the for statement. And number 3, if you have a list of values and you want to extract each element of the list out, you can use the for statement for that. So again, the for statement has some additional functionality for us for creating a loop and initializing a value to either a number, a character, or an element from the list. When do you use it instead of a while? Why? It sounds like for does everything for me. It does a lot. When would you not be able to use a for when you would have to have some iteration? Well, if you're testing conditions, suppose you want to test to see if this number is greater than that and another value is equal to something. So if you're testing conditions, you're doing specific tests, you can't use the for, and you would have to use the while. So again, the hard part is when do we use this? I can't tell you. I can give you specific cases where the for is going to work. If you never saw a for statement, you still can write any program you want. It just turns out that the for statement is going to make it easier for you. Again, I give you a homework assignment that's going to reinforce using the for, and then as you use more of this and you're using a while statement, hopefully you'll figure out which you should use. Okay? So that's it for today. Again, we won't be meeting in class on Monday. You'll instead be watching a faceless voice in the screen talk about another marvel in Python next Monday morning. So, okay, I'll see you next Wednesday. And I won't be having office hours Monday morning either. If you need to contact, I can be contacted. Send me an email.